Hello.
Just quite quickly, is this the final of the monthly meetings for the club for the spring, or is there often one in June less?
Usually not one in
No.
June.
Okay, so this is it. So this is until the fall of the.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you everybody for taking time tonight, in addition to busy lives, to participate in this interactive presentation from myself and Nico. I'm just going to share my screen. I'm going to press record and we're going to get going. And as I said at the beginning, I feel like this isn't the most polished that I would like to be, but I am going to wing it like a Harlequin duck. And we're just going to have some fun. And you know what? I think we all need that right now, because as of last night, with the extra stringent, restrictions coming into play for a little while for us, it's kind of a bummer. And so I want to kind of, lighten things up and do this presentation called Conservation from a Canoe. So I'm going to start the recording. So just so you know, that will be part of this and sharing it after with a wider audience. Stop recording, pause recording. Oh, it doesn't give me the option to resume anymore. So maybe this is being recorded. I don't know if somebody can confirm that. And that's okay if I've overspoken here, because I can we can edit this.
It looks like it's recording. I see a record button with a red button.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
I think
Perfect.
Evan recorded it, guys.
Okay, thank you. All right, so as a formal start to the presentation, welcome to Conservation from a Canoe. These are tips, the dry kind, on how to incorporate conservation into your paddling trips. So I'm going to just introduce myself, and then Nico will introduce herself. And she's going to speak to the first part, which is the clean, dry, drain, the whole like federal and provincial guidelines around invasive aquatic species. And then I'm going to do a bit more of a talk about leave no trace and how it relates to river-based trips. And also I'll talk about citizen science. So to give you a bit of an idea of what else you can do in terms of conservation from a canoe. So again, thanks for having us. I have to figure out how to go to the next slide here without going 10 in. I don't know. Maybe click on it. Okay, the first thing I wanted to do though was remind you that we're playing bingo tonight, and it's a really easy way to play bingo. So it's paddling bingo, and it was shared in the Facebook group, and we can share it in the chat. But you know what? All you have to do is grab a piece of paper and put bingo across the top and 1 through 5 down the side. And what we're going to do throughout the presentation is we're going to call out B1, or under the N, number 4. And we'll call out what we have, like I have heard of aquatics invasive species. And then you can just put a check mark or an X in your box there. And once you have a row of 5 or 5 in a row diagonal, you can actually win a great prize pack. So tonight we have a Mark Lund book of paddling to give away, and we'll be putting together 3 prize packs. One is with a few other things like throw bag baler combos, 1 immersion small fleece long sleeve pullover, a Zip Tech zipper lubricant, cottonmouth nose plugs, repair adhesive, a Campers Village keyring, and a Holiday Alberta license plate holder. And then water bottles and notepads from the Banff Volunteer Program. And that will all become clear after. So if you haven't already got a pen and a piece of paper and done like your grid, I would go ahead and do that quickly, because we're going to start out even just right away with a bingo. So the first one I want to call is B1. I have stopped at a watercraft inspection station. So if you get that one, you can put it under the B1. The other thing we like to do at Parks Canada, and both Nico and I work full-time for Parks Canada, is a land acknowledgement. So whenever we do presentations, we talk about and honor the history and the relationship with Indigenous people who have been here for millennia. We acknowledge that Banff National Park is within the present-day territories of the Treaty 6, 7, and 8, as well as the Métis homeland. The lands and waters of Banff have been used for millennia by Indigenous peoples for sustenance, ceremony, trade, and travel. We thank them for their continuous stewardship and for sharing the land with us. So I'll just do a quick introduction and pass it over to Nico. For myself, I have been a club member for 15 years come July. I've also worked for Parks Canada since the same time. And I've developed the volunteer program in Banff National Park from scratch. And I am a big paddler. I do also like to hike when I can't paddle. And I do like to bike. I live in Canmore, and I basically have my husband and 2 fur babies. And yeah, I get out as much as I can and hoping to get out more. So with that, I'll hand it over to Nico.
Hi, everyone. Tina, if you could just give me a thumbs up if I sound okay.
Yes, you do.
Awesome. Yes, you do. Thank you. So I'm not part of the Canoe Club, but this sounds like a lot of fun. I might just have to join. So Nico Magden, I'm on the same team as Tina with Parks Canada with Visitor Experience Product Development. I'm originally from Jasper, Alberta. My big passion is conservation, rock climbing, fly fishing, and I like spending as much time near the water as possible. Not much of a paddler, but I do enjoy getting out. And since July, I've been working on an aquatic invasive species prevention program for the Banff Field Unit in collaboration with the other mountain national parks. So working a lot with Jasper, Lake Louise, Yoho, Kootenay, Waterton, and both the Alberta, BC provinces, as well as the Western United States. So it's really great that we're making these great gains. It's really important to prevent aquatic invasive species because, as you may know, they're typically really hard to get rid of once they're introduced. So you can switch to the next slide, Tina.
Can I just call a bingo under the N, sure. Number 1? Under the N, number. I have heard of aquatics invasive species. So mark that down if you have heard of that, in aquatics invasive species.
Okay, so aquatic invasive species are non-native species that have been introduced to an area. So these species are not natural to the ecosystem. They haven't developed or evolved along with native species, and they're a real problem around the planet. So native species are typically held in check and controlled by predators, parasites, pathogens, competitors. However, when they're transported to a new environment, these natural checks are usually left behind, giving them the opportunity to explode in population and really take over an entire ecosystem. And they're very difficult to, if not impossible, to control once they've been introduced. So they're a little bit like aliens. We can go to the next slide. So here we have a couple of pictures. So the picture on the left-hand side is a rudder that's being completely taken over by zebra quagga mussels. And then the picture on the right is a fish that has been contaminated with whirling disease. I'm sure you guys have probably heard about zebra quagga mussels and whirling disease, but AIS threaten native species. They affect biodiversity. They're often impossible to eradicate, and they often interfere with recreational activities and can result in water body closures, such as what happened in Yellowstone National Park. And then they can really damage water-related infrastructure as well. So Nico, definitely want to prevent them.
Sorry, I did read somewhere it was socioeconomic like impacts from invasive species as well as environmental. And I never thought of it as socioeconomic, but when you said, you know, that they close waterways, that's definitely part of like recreation and local economies and all of that. So actually I just put that together as a good.
Yeah, it's true. And I think province of Ontario spends roughly $22 million a year just trying to physically remove invasive mussels from their waterways. So, and definitely it affects human health, because I know I feel a lot better when I have access to nature and water and the ability to get out there. So that's a good point, Tina.
Yeah, definitely the expense of managing all that, instead of, like, if you can prevent it. So I have a bingo under the N, number 5. I know the difference between native and non-native or invasive species. So if you feel like you do know the difference, mark that off under N and number 5.
Perfect. So transmission pathways. So there's quite a few different ways that aquatic invasive species can be introduced. Sometimes they're introduced naturally. For example, like an osprey could pick up a fish that's been contaminated with whirling disease and drop it into another water body. But the chances of that are pretty slim. So we're looking at the really most probable ways that aquatic invasive species are introduced. And generally that is intentional or unintentional release into new areas. So something as simple as flushing your goldfish down the toilet could have disastrous results. Goldfish are actually quite closely related to the Prussian carp, and they've been found in the Bow River. Some weird things have been found in the Bow River, starfish and other species from aquariums that people have unintentionally introduced. They just don't know the consequences of that. And then sometimes they're intentionally introduced as well. So that would be stocking your favorite lake or pond or river system with something that you want to sport fish, or even for food sources. There's the northern crayfish has been introduced into some of the watersheds near Calgary, and they're not native to that area, and they're intentionally introduced as a food source, we think. And then another transmission pathway is boats and gear. So that's the one that we're really focusing on in Banff National Park. And then water recreationalists in general, just fishing waders, people just playing in the water. It could be anything really. And then construction equipment and waterway alterations. So those are the common transmission pathways.
Great. And under the O, number 5 in bingo, I know the difference between transmission and prevention. Mark it down if you think you know.
Liking the bingo, Tina, that's fun. So here we have some more pictures of the zebra and quagga mussels, and a picture of a beach that's been completely taken over. So this is actually a lake shore in Ontario. So as you can imagine, it's not a lot of fun accessing waterways when the beaches are completely littered, the shells stink, and they are very sharp and can cut you. So definitely not a lot of fun. But these aquatic invasive species are spreading throughout the Western United States and making their way from Eastern Canada. They're originally introduced from ballast from big ships coming in from the Ukraine. They're native in the Ukraine. And now they're being spread mostly through watercraft and water-related gear. And it's really important that we prevent them from being introduced because they're really hard to eradicate. So these mussels attach themselves to watercraft and water-related gear and are often called aquatic hitchhikers because they have this really interesting, it's called a byssal thread that attaches itself onto watercraft. And they're usually so tiny you can't see them. So if you imagine that the end of a pen, that's about how small they are when they're attaching themselves. And then when they're in their egg stage, they can actually survive in water and you just don't know. So any standing water could have the eggs in it. And they can actually survive outside of water for up to 30 days. So that's pretty easy to unintentionally, not knowing, have some of these on your boat. And even if you think that it's dry, there could be some standing water, and you leave it in your garage for 20 days and there could still be invasive mussels attached. And then one tiny little mussel can produce up to 1 million microscopic eggs per year. So just one little mussel gets into one of our watersheds and it could be disastrous. And they have no predators and they filter nutrients. And this often kills off native species like West Slope cutthroat trout. So they can filter one mussel up to 1 liter of water a day. So they really take out all the nutrients of a water, and that just pretty much affects everything. So here, this next is a map of the different locations within the Western states in Canada. So the red dots are zebra mussels, the yellow are both zebra and quagga, and the green are quagga. So if you see Alberta, we're looking good. BC, Saskatchewan, we're in good shape, but they have made themselves, they've introduced into Lake Winnipeg and Manitoba. And you can actually kind of imagine the transmission pathway because you can see that they're coming up from the States mostly and coming from Eastern Canada as well. Alberta Parks intercepted 30 mussel-fouled boats last summer, and that's actually an increase by 10% from previous years. So we think that even with the closed borders that they were coming in from Eastern Canada. And I think a lot of us noticed just a lot more people out recreating this summer. So something to keep in mind.
They're highly adaptive, aren't they, Nico? So I have a bingo for B, number 3 down. I can name high-risk aquatics invasive species for Alberta. I think we just covered that. So that's the bingo. B3, I can name high-risk aquatics invasive species for Alberta.
Okay, next we have whirling disease. So in 2016, whirling disease was confirmed in Johnson Lake in Banff National Park, unfortunately. And this is the first occurrence of whirling disease in Canada. So whirling disease is caused by a parasite that causes skeletal deformities in infected fish. And the disease can be spread to other water bodies through spores in mud. The disease can be spread to other water bodies, and they can survive in mud for up to 30 years. So this disease is not harmful to humans or other mammals, but can have a significant effects to native fish. And it's spread by moving infected or live dead fish, infected worms, contaminated equipment, standing water, or contaminated water. So what we're doing in Parks Canada is taking a combination approach. So we're working on education. The good thing about aquatic invasive species is that I think once people really understand the risk, people really want to protect what they care about. And we have a lot of people that care about our water systems. So education and outreach is going to be a big component, and just informing and engaging with different folks will help us a lot. And then we're looking at having increased regulations and actually having watercraft inspections within Banff National Park. And we're continuing doing monitoring. So that's the aquatics team, the biologists in Parks Canada. They go out and take samples and see if new aquatic invasive species have been introduced. And then we're working on regional coordination as well. We think that the easier we make it for visitors and watercraft recreationalists, having the same regulations in each region is really helpful, so that you're not confused if things change between Lake Louise and Banff or Jasper or even Alberta and BC. So we're really working on coordination so that it's really streamlined and easy for people to know what the regulations are and follow them. So one of the things we're doing this summer is we're piloting a watercraft inspections for motorized watercraft. So we're just starting out with motorized for the mandatory inspections. And that's because the more complex a boat, the more likely it is to have standing water in the compartments. There's the ballast systems where it's really easy to have water. So we're focusing the inspections on the motorized watercraft at launching in Lake Minnewanka. So that'll be mandatory this summer for motorized watercraft. And
I have a question.
So
yes, if they find something on your boat, do you get like fined or penalized or anything? Like what happens if you don't do a good job,
no,
or if you like deliberately neglect cleaning your boat? Like if you have like a mud mobile.
It's a good question. So I think from Alberta Parks and BC Parks, it's actually illegal to transport knowingly. So if you were, I don't think anyone would intentionally be moving around zebra and quagga mussels, but there's the Chinese mystery snail that's a food source, and it's illegal to transport any of those aquatic invasive species. So you could get fined if you were found to be doing that. And in the national parks, you're not allowed to use live bait for fishing, so you could get fined for bringing in live bait. But if you didn't clean, drain, dry, we would actually disinfect, decontaminate the watercraft, do the best that we can to clean it out, And then if there were mussels found on it, we can issue a quarantine order, which would mean that you would have to just basically dry your watercraft for up to 30 days. But currently there's no fine. Alberta Parks, they do have a fine if you were to bypass one of their inspection stations. They have the big highway signs lit up. And if you are to bypass that, you could get, I think it's a $300 fine. But the fines are pretty limited right now. What we really want to do is get people who want to do this. We can't be everywhere all at the same time. So the really important part is getting people to care enough to want to do it and have the knowledge too to back that up. So it's a little bit of a blurry map here, but I've added the link as well. But this is basically a really great resource that shows all of the different inspection stations in Canada and the United States. So if you're ever going on a trip and you wanted to look that up, this is a great resource. It's from the Western AIS webpage, and it's fantastic. There's all sorts of great resources. There's videos of how to do the clean, drain, dry for different types of watercraft and some other great resources as well.
Great, Nico. And because it was mentioned just recently, I want to call a bingo. Under the N, number 2, I always clean my fishing gear between trips. So if you do, you can mark that off.
Thanks,
If you don't have fishing gear, is it a free space?
Yeah, you can mark that free space down too. Yes. In the middle.
And another thing that we're going to pilot in Banff Field Unit and Lake Louise, this has been going on in Yoho and Kootenay National Parks for the last 3 years, but it's self-certification for hand-launched human-powered watercraft. So this is where paddlers would be more interested in this, this new regulation. So basically, we're going to be setting up similar permit stands as the one shown in the picture in 20 locations within the Banff Field Unit at popular water access points. And basically, it's a self-certification where there's permits inside the box and people are asked to fill it out. And it's basically verifying that you have clean, drained, dried your watercraft. And this is really going to help us get some really good data. We don't really know how many people are entering, what water bodies, what types of watercraft they're bringing, and then also where they were before. So the permit asks you to list the different water bodies that you have been previously. And a permit is required daily and for each new water body. So this is going to be the tough one. I think personally, like if I'm on a trip or on a fly fishing trip, you don't just go to one water body. And what we're doing is asking people to completely dry their gear for 24 hours in between moving water bodies. So this is going to be a tough one for people to adjust to, I think. But it is really important. If you think about it, you could be like someone could take a paddleboard to Johnson Lake, which has been infected with whirling disease, and then go onto the Bow River, which that's a bad example. That's also been infected with whirling disease, but take it up to Boom Lake, for example, and then you could be infecting that lake. So if you go to the next slide, Tina, it shows the permit. And basically we're asking people to verify that they have cleaned, drained, and dried their watercraft, and then asking what type of watercraft they've used. It's legal, so there's a signature component to it. And then they take the bottom part of the permit, and that's the permit for the day.
Great. I do want to call one more bingo for this. Okay, so under the G, number 3 down, I have heard of clean, dry, drain protocol. So mark that off if you have.
Hey, Nikki, I was going to ask you a question about, let's say you're hiking in Boom Lake area and that water is infected and you drink out of it. Is that going to affect the human person, or do you have to boil it to purify it or whatnot, treat it somehow?
That's a great question. Yeah, whirling disease, it doesn't affect humans or mammals. So it only affects salmonoid type fishes. Was that your question? Yeah, but it's still good to boil because it probably has Giardia or something. So here we just have some images of all the different watercraft that should be clean, drained, dried. So even things like dogs and canoes, stand-up paddleboards, safety equipment. So anything that's come into contact with water should be completely clean, drained, and dried.
Yeah, and this brings up the topic of there's the wash, which I've heard is another like almost fourth word. It's easier to remember clean, drain, and dry, but I've heard of wash, and now I see lots of examples of that where it's like wash any gear that you've put into any water body, right? Including your dog, including yourself, your life jackets, you know, all of that that could be contaminated. I think that's probably just a good practice, right? So under the G, number 5, I know what WASH stands for in clean, drain, dry, wash protocols. So if you do know that now, which you should, mark it down.
Well, question, Tina, does wash mean with soap and water or just wiping with clean water?
That's a good question for Nico.
Okay, Nico.
Sure. Yeah, so ideally, what we want people to do is before they leave the shoreline is to clean all the mud, sand, plants. So do a visual inspection and completely make sure that all of the items don't have any residual plants or anything mud on them. And then while you're on the shoreline, drain onto land. So all the items that can hold water, and remove the seats, pull the drain plug, and then dry all items completely before entering a new river or pond system. So this is kind of the best option if you don't have access to the hose system. But to be honest, the very best way to make sure that you're not transporting aquatic invasive species is after doing all these things, once you get home, to do another good hose. But the problem is that you really want to make sure that the water isn't entering any new water access area. So if it goes into storm drains, that could be an issue. If you take it to the car wash, that could be an issue as well. So it is really important to try to get all the debris, anything off of it while you're still in that location. And then once you're home or once it's available, to try to give it a really good hose. And I think in future years, as of even hopefully next summer, we're going to have the opportunity to be able to provide cleaning services for all types of watercraft. So we'll have a watercraft inspection decontamination station where folks can come by, bring all their different types of watercraft fishing gear, and then we'll do that for people. But to completely decontaminate things like whirling disease and quagga and zebra mussels, it actually requires really hot water and a high pressure. But the best thing that we can do is do what we can while we're on the shoreline, and then when we get home, do what you can as well. And then the dry component is really important as well. I think a lot of people are like, okay, it's dry, but it has to be completely dry. Like I said, those mussel eggs, if there's any standing water, whirling disease, any standing water, it could definitely be spread into different water bodies.
And I think to emphasize not having soap into our waterways would be something that we would not want to see, right, Nico? Like to try to
it's true. You can use, you can use bleach or quat, but that was the same problem, is that then that's getting back into the water system. Right. So it is best to not use, the strong soaps and bleaches. But if you have access to an area, like that is something that you can do for things like life vests and that kind of thing, is just fill up a bucket, put in some really, really hot water and let it soak for a while, and then let it dry completely for 24 hours.
Great.
Nico, I was told when you did the highway inspections that you need 24 hours to dry your boat, and that was satisfactory. Is that still accurate?
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
Okay, as long as you just after that wipe off any mud or dirt, or would you have to after it's dried for 24 hours?
I'm not sure I understand. Could you repeat again?
So it takes 24 hours to kill the disease, the whirling disease. So you wait the 24 hours at home, but you still got some surface dirt and mud on it. Do you still have to wipe that off, or you have to worry about that at all?
Oh, like if it's all
you would
dried
still
out.
need to wipe it off. Yeah, you would still make, so it has to be like completely drained or cleaned and then drained and then dried. The issue is that whirling disease can survive in the mud for up to 30 years as well. So you need to drain and dry standing water, but also clean off all the mud and plants.
So it's not a good idea to wash it at home in your alleyway and have it drain down the alley eventually into the storm drains?
That's not ideal, but I've been told that gravel is actually not a bad way of draining out things like whirling disease. So as long as it's naturally draining through gravel and not entering a storm drain, that would be okay. It depends on if your alley has gravel.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Great questions. So I think something that everyone can do is, first of all, like learn and know as much as you can about aquatic invasive species and the clean, drain, dry procedures, and then really make it a habit everywhere you go. This will take some serious behavioral change, I think, and just adjustment of the way that we recreate with the water. And then there's some great sources that Tina will probably mention too, that we can support citizen science. So there's iNaturalist, where you can identify plant and aquatic invasive species. EdMaps is the invasive species monitoring and reporting. So if you find anything that you think could be invasive, that's a great place. And then MyCatch is fish population monitoring. If any of you are out fishing or you see anything in the water, that's another really great resource as well.
And I would add that, you know, to this, there's also the protocol of Play Clean Go, which is about like terrestrial invasive plants and invasive species. So it does extend beyond water, but I do know from working for Parks Canada that in the State of the Parks report, the last couple of times we've produced it, the aquatics has been in the red, which means out of all of the indicators that we monitor in the park, it is, you know, it needs the most help. You know, we all know how important water is in terms of quantity, quality, and what we do with it, and the fact that our headwaters are almost all up at the Bow Glacier, and we're all connected through water right through the city of Calgary. So yeah, it's really important to start to put these protocols in place, and practicing these is important. I'm going to switch to another PowerPoint, but I wanted to offer up like 5 minutes for any more questions and one more bingo. I have one more, and it's number 5, and it's, I can say West Slope cutthroat trout 5 times fast. So if you think you can, then mark that down. Okay, any questions? Yeah, I can see people trying it out. Nico, what were you saying when you were taking this project?
Nico, I kept saying, I think it was West Coast slop throat trout. I had to practice a lot.
I practiced on a walk the other day. I couldn't get too fast with it, but I tried. Okay, any other questions for Nico? Fire away. Or put them in the chat if you'd like to put them there. Oh my gosh, well, you must have covered everything really well, Nico. So thank you very much. So as a prop.
I got a question. Go
ahead. Yep.
Yeah, sorry. We don't fish, but we're thinking about fishing. So how would you recommend cleaning a fishing line once you spooled it back onto the inside of the reels? How do you
That's a great question. Yeah, so
what length of the fishing line?
For sure. So what we suggest is that actually, as you have your line out after fishing, is you take a damp cloth and you actually wipe off the entire line, and then let it dry in between use. I live in Dead Man's Flat, so I fish the Bow River all the time, which has whirling disease. And I have 2 sets of equipment now, which was a bit of an investment, but there's one set of equipment I only use in the Bow River. And then if I'm going into any of the national park waters or areas that have no aquatic invasives and still have native fish species, then I'll take the separate equipment. I don't think everyone would really necessarily jump on board with doing that. And then the boots are really important too. So there's the felt wading boots, and those are actually not permitted in the national parks. They make the perfect material for aquatic invasives. They're like Velcro. So basically invasives can just latch onto them. So it's better to get the rubber soled boots. And then same thing with waders, you could deal with it the same way that you would with a life jacket, is basically immerse it into hot water in a bucket, let it soak for a little while, and then dry it out completely.
Okay.
I would
It
say
takes time.
All right, thanks.
relevant part of like that would be, what do we do with throw bags if they've ended up in the water? And we usually want to dry them out anyways, but we definitely want to like hose them down, I guess, too. They got into the mud, which, you know, sometimes they do. So yeah, lots to consider. It sounds like a big effort, but Nico, it sounds like you're the role model and you're leading on this. And if you can do it, I think other people can do it as well. So if we want to keep these
and
waterways.
sometimes it's hard to take the right procedures, but I think the important thing is that everyone does their best. Like if for some reason, you know, you're not able to completely get all the mud off, but you're aware of it and you try to wash it off and dry it, that's still a lot better than not doing anything at all. So any efforts that we can do is definitely going to help out.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions for Nico while we have her? And Nico, it's totally your choice to stay on or to, you know, I think I feel really good about carrying on with my part as well. And you can stay or you can kind of check yourself off for working a full day. More than any other questions?
I might point off and go fishing actually.
Ooh, yeah. Go catch some. Nice. Thank you very much. We're going to switch gears here and just into the other PowerPoint, but any last burning questions? Yeah.
Yeah, one more. So besides the hot water soak, is bleach a second option? And what else would be another option?
Yeah, another option is they say quat works really well, which is I think it's a type of bleach, but it's spelled Q-U-A-T. And that's something that's often used. And the good thing about quat is that it doesn't affect material. So that's a safe product to use.
Okay, great.
Lots of options. That's great. Just have to get into the habit. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Nico.
Well, thanks, everyone. It was great meeting you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for
Hopefully
your time.
we'll see you out on the river this summer.
Happy fishing.
Thanks.
So like I said, I'm going to cover the rest of the presentation with two other topics. One is leave no trace, with a bit of a twist of it's river-based leave no trace. And the other one will be talking about citizen science. So I'll continue with the bingo as well. And the first thing I want to call out is, so there's 7 principles of leave no trace. And I would like to call out the one that says, I practice leave no trace principle number 1, which is plan ahead and prepare. And I think we all do that by default, but these are the 7 principles of leave no trace. And you probably are familiar or you know them well. What you might not realize is that first of all, leave no trace was started in the United States in probably the 70s, I want to say, just in terms of a response to an impactful sort of a love of the lands in the United States. And it was recognized by the nonprofit organization to start the whole idea of like pack it in, pack it out. You know, basically the saying of take only pictures and leave only footprints, which now is a new thing where it can be an impact to do that too, where with, you know, things going viral, you can take a picture. If you're an influencer online, you can take a picture of a beautiful view and put it out on the internet and on social media to take more, you know, more of the same pictures, and that can be an impact. So they've actually come up, they're well ahead of the game with the ideas of being science decision-based and backed up by science. And they have chapters in different countries of the world. So Canada has a Leave No Trace Canada chapter. And so I took a master educator's course and a river-based master instructor course a number of years ago. And I have lots of pictures to show to demonstrate the various 7 principles. But I just want to point out a couple of things about these principles. So one is the fact that there's rules and regulations, and then there's ethics. And Leave No Trace talks a lot about these principles being ethics. So yeah, we have lots of land management organizations and agencies that have the regulations, like national parks have the National Park Act. And you can get fines and things for doing things wrong. But ethics are more of the things that you would do and practice because you think or feel that is the right thing to do. So it's really important to realize there's a difference between rules and regulations and ethics when it comes to rules and regulations are what you do when people are watching and might tell on you. And ethics are those kinds of things you would do no matter what. And if nobody's watching, you would still practice these things because you just feel like that it's the right thing to do. The other thing to know about the 7 principles is that the principles, as you see them on the slide here, they don't change. They're timeless. These are the 7 principles. This is the exact wording we use in this way of communicating and behaving as a leave no trace on like a whole spectrum of behaviors. But what can come under each principle can be adapted to things like the ecosystem and the audience. So there are ways of expressing the leave no trace principles that are really specific to like the high alpine, like on the picture. In that case, if there's no established trail and you have to cross it, you would actually not go in single file. You would probably spread out and not have that much of an impact or have less impact on that environment. So those are examples. There's also leave no trace principles or for kids as an audience and that kind of thing. Like I think they use a Sasquatch cartoon character, that kind of thing. So really, just to remind you and update you on what Leave No Trace is all about, I wanted to show you that back in 2008, I was able to take a river-based Leave No Trace course on the North Saskatchewan. And we went from Nordag to, I want to say Horberg, but I think we might have actually taken out at Rocky Mountain House. This was through Haskin, the Haskin company, so Priscilla and Alex. And the funnest things were, we were a small group, but we had Mark Lund on the trip, and we had Mike Hornbala, who is a high school teacher and teaches all this stuff as well. We were all taking this river-based course. And of course, this is us at the put-in, and we're just kind of like looking at the still water. And of course, Mark Lund is the one who's sitting down, and I would say he's the one already demonstrating conservation. He's the one who's conserving energy at this point. So the other thing is we would come across, the fire pits that people make with just rocks and like what they leave behind. And of course, we all see this everywhere. It seems to be on the increase. And I do get in this, but we do see an increase in that. So there's 2 things about this picture that really speak to the principles. And this is where it's like pack it in and pack it out, or, make sure you clean up after yourself. And then there's also, cleaning up after others, be considerate of others, and respect wildlife. Actually, there's like 4 or 5 principles here. And also I would say fire, minimize the impact of fire. If you feel like you need to have the fire, the campfire, it's really important to try to have more of a leave no trace fire. So if you're familiar with this type of trip down the North Saskatchewan, and this is the kind of thing that is the first part and a longer part of the trip. It's pretty slow current, pretty wide, but beautiful vistas. And we're well spaced, but this is of course before COVID. Here's another campfire ring that I would say doesn't really count for leave no trace, minimum impacts. We have, lots of rocks around the old fire bed, but nobody's taken the effort to disassemble the fire. It's a good idea to try to do that and discourage other people from making the same fire. Oh, and this is just an idea of, there's a toad in the middle of this picture hopping along, and to think of, this toad actually going through a, old fire pit and getting all kinds of, stuff on him. That's just kind of what you got to think of in terms of trying to put into place Leave No Trace. Oh yeah, so human waste. So the club has been, pretty good at having, times when we've installed toilets, like on Wildcat Island a few years ago, the Ghost Dam to Cochrane trip. But yeah, definitely, making sure that we do the right thing when it comes to the human waste that we have, that we generate on trips. So it could be like a reciprocal like this, or it could be that if you're on a really remote trip, like we were on the Nahanni and the Wind River, picking a place to dig a latrine and burying that waste and then burning or otherwise packing out all the toilet paper is, I think, pretty good Leave No Trace protocol. So on that note, I want to call a bingo. And the one I want to do is number 2, I try not to disturb or stress out wildlife. And I want to call another one, G, number 4, I have practiced Leave No Trace with human waste on a trip. And of course, this is a little strawberry. And I think of how delicious they're just packed with flavor. They're so tiny. You probably discovered these along the way somewhere. But even if you're peeing in the bush, you might be peeing on one of these, and then somebody might come along and actually try to harvest these. So Leave No Trace ultimately would be probably leaving this for wildlife to actually, enjoy, but also considering others when it comes to where we put our wastewater, or where we go number 2 or number 1. So just being aware that these things are all around us all the time. Oh yeah, and this is Mark Lund really drilling it into us. So he's got a saw and an axe, and he's demonstrating, I think, how to build a fire next. So again, this is obviously a pretty established fire ring, and with seating around it. So I think what this does is it encourages people to know that this is an established camping area with this fire pit that can be communal, and this is where you have a fire. You don't go and make another couple of sets of fire rings. You actually gather around the one bigger fire. So that can be considered too, as I think, pretty minimum impact, because it concentrates it in one area. And also it's not, right by the trees and roots. And of course, no matter what, you want to make sure it's out. This is an ant pile. They were pretty big in this one campsite we were camping in. So you really wanted to be careful not to camp on one of those, and put our tent right there. I think they were actually red ants too. Here's another example of a fire ring that, it's not a great one to promote. We really wanted to disassemble this and try to get it back to where it could regenerate with plant growth. You can see the plants around there are pretty delicate. There's probably a short growing season, and the idea is to try, to encourage that to be all one instead of a big patch in the middle with where the fire's been. Because there could be things like Indian paintbrush that can grow up and bloom there. These plants are really important native habitat for wildlife as well. And then there's another example of another different human waste reciprocal that we could use. You can bring along your own too. Many people do on river trips. Here's another great example of, we had lots of these on our trip. And so the idea is everywhere we saw them, we would disassemble them and try to make them look like where people would not have fires. It does discourage people from having fires and then having, to deal with wildfires, which we don't want to do. This is, I think, whoops, sorry, where that one, yeah, that became this. So even when you try to disassemble and make it look like it's not a fire pit, there's still residual aspects that you can tell, yeah, there was a fire there. So you can just imagine how long that lasts on the landscape. And there's Mike giving a little bit of instruction. We are actually moving into more of a pristine site where nobody tends to camp. So we're going to actually see what that looks like. In the meantime, I have a bingo. So under the G number 2, I have made a leave no trace fire on a paddling trip. So mark that down if you've done that. And that means you have really, like, you don't leave a trace. Nobody can tell you've camped or had a fire. There's another typical campsite. Nice little beach there. Oh yeah, and putting your tent on a durable surface is key to, again, concentrating any impact in an area, not widening that impact. And sometimes it's hard because if the campsites aren't really well used, it's hard to tell where to put your tent down, and you may actually, yeah, be on a place where there is some plant matter. Oh yeah, and just having a fire in one of these, like, I think they're called Kelly stoves or something like that, where it's just feeding in a little bit of wood, but getting a lot of water boiled, is a really good alternative to having a campfire and cooking all the time over a campfire. So things to consider there. We're just, you know, taking our leave no trace very seriously at the picnic table. We actually had to take turns teaching each other on the different 7 principles. So if you ever take a course like this, you will be expected to be an instructor on the trip. Yeah, there's Mark being very serious again with whatever principle he's going to teach us. And then Mike, he always, you know, lightens things up again really well. And of course, you have to brag about the food on these trips. Everybody had really good food. And then you just have to, you know, sit and enjoy the fire. So this is actually, this is actually, you can hardly tell, but there's like a big, like huge roll of, like, I think it's aluminum underneath this campfire. So it's a full-on fire, but once you're done and everything has been, you know, actually melted down to ashes, you can roll it up and be gone, and there's really no impact to what's underneath, to the soil and whatnot. And this is all because, you know, the trees watch us, sometimes aghast with what we do. It was just a really fun trip and really laid back. And there's Mark again. I wish Mark was on here because I'm razzing him a bit about this, but, you know, again, here he is conserving energy. Good on him. Of course, I'm just letting the current carry me, and I'm taking pictures. And there's Mike. I don't know what he's doing, fighting a river snake or something. So there's my tent site for the night in the pristine camp area that we've picked. And I actually had a hard time, putting my tent down on these beautiful little plants. But, you know, you do it, and then you realize when you take your tent up, even just after one night, you have had an impact on the ground and the plants that grow there. So, you know, it also makes it obvious to somebody else that, oh yeah, somebody's been here. Oh, maybe a tent's been here. Maybe I can put my tent here too. And that's how it starts. The impact starts. And it sounds like it's not much, but it does make a difference. It's not just one person doing it. It's when more people do it. It's the cumulative impacts of that. So I think before we left this site, we actually sort of fluffed up the plants and tried to help them along to get back to looking a bit more perky. Oh yeah, and then we talked about how things had to be multi-use on trips. So this thing on Mark's head got used a few times for different things, and you'll see that a bit more coming up. But what I'd like to do is, just another bingo. So B, number 2, I've never littered on paddling trips. That's a good one. And also B, number 4, I always camp on durable and spaces and designated surfaces. Again, we spent a lot of time just in circle and like discussing the principles, and you can do this, you know, quite in depth. And there's a lot to be said about each one. This part of the presentation could have been an hour in itself at least. But of course, during the day, you're also on the water, enjoying rafting up. We had great weather, and that's my little solo boat. And I am happiest when I'm canoeing, as you can see. Again, just like taking note of the little plants or the little things that are around us and getting to know the ecosystem that you're in. So under the O, number 1, I know what riparian zone means. Riparian zone is the area, just like anytime there's a transition zone from water to land. So it's that really cool area where there's lots of biodiversity, but it's also very vulnerable, but it also gets stressed out by different like seasons and different things that happen to it, and it makes it stronger. So it's really interesting to study riparian zones, but also to respect them. So there's impact points around boats and riparian zones to be aware of. Even if you stop for your lunch, can you stop and have lunch on a hard or like durable surface, like a beach or rocks, to minimize your impact, especially if you're a bigger group. So the other thing is when you discover something like a fossil or maybe something that would be considered an artifact, something old like this, railway nail or whatever. And do you leave it? Do you take a picture of it? Do you draw it? Do you take a rubbing of it? Just to, again, have an example of it, but not actually take it. And like leaving it for others to enjoy and discover is good. But also, if it's in the national parks, you're not allowed to take any of those things with you. So the idea of just, you want to take it with you as a little memory of the trip, but the idea is to leave it. So we did. I really enjoyed going back through these photos. Here's another example of, a very large fire ring, well established, but instead of adding to that, we decided to have a different kind of fire, probably one that's easier to cook over too, which is in this firebox. And the person who brought it, it was really easy to fold like down, and it was folding flat and pretty easy to carry in a canoe. So, it was a good alternative to having a full-on campfire. Oh, and there's a better picture of having a fire on top of like tinfoil. And I know on the Nahanni and the Wind, we had that kind of arrangement where it was like a lid from one of those metal garbage bins. And we would always have a fire on that. And then it always was easy to clean up. And there was really no trace of it. So it's a good way to go. Oh, and this one is what was used on Mark's head earlier. So it's a veggie steamer insert. I thought that was really unique as far as not having a huge fire, but still being able to have a fire. So in bingo, I'm calling B5. I have used a candle or decided not to have a campfire at all on a trip. One of the other things Mike helped us do was, in terms of getting to know the ecosystem and the riparian zone, we did a bug survey. So this was river bugs. And again, I'm no biologist, but it was really cool to kick up some of the silt from underneath the rocks, filter it through a net, put it into put it through water. And then he had these identification paper, cheat sheets that we could use to identify which bugs were existing in the water. We looked at them through a little microscope and, the ice cube tray. And that was a really good way to see it. A great activity for kids. And you have a healthy riverbed when you have these insects that you can, really study. And they're fascinating. And of course, you want to put them back after. So that was the end of that Leave No Trace experience. And I think, we all integrated, it even more when we got to do it hands-on and in person, canoe tripping. And I want to offer, a course, river-based trip and course at some point, if it can happen this year or at some point for the Canoe Club. I would love to be able to do that. So before we move on to the next topic, I want to do one more bingo. So under the I, number 3, I've picked up litter on a paddling trip. So if you've done that, and I know many of you have, mark that off. Oh, and one more. I, number 1, I have never taken any fossils from a site on a trip. I think the other really good one is, in terms of considering how much gear we tend to use on trips and as paddlers in general, if you take really good care of your gear, it will last you a long time. And I think that really speaks to being, thinking of conservation and the resources it takes just to have all that gear and like to manufacture all of that. It's really important to try to make it last a long time. So under the G, 1, I take good care of all my gear so it lasts a long time. Okay, how's everybody doing? We got one more section to go through and it's kind of fun and quick. So the citizen science part is really interesting to me. I did a master's degree in leadership, but I did it on citizen science. Les, did you have anything? I just heard something. Okay. And what I did was studied citizen science, which is when the public actually help with science and research and monitoring. Oh, Les, can you mute yourself, please? So the public participation in research and science and monitoring is often called citizen science. And one of the things that we do in Parks Canada in Banff is we have a few citizen science projects going on. One of them is around the harlequin duck count. And I was really privileged to be part of this with the Canoe Club back in 2006. And there was a bird bander and a couple of staff and myself and a few volunteers. And then we invited the Canoe Club to come out with boats because we needed the canoes to marshal some of the harlequin ducks into an area that they would be netted and then they could be banded. So if you don't already know, harlequin ducks are a whitewater duck species. They do migrate from coast, like east and west, and they spend time on the coast in the winter and they come back in the summer here to nest and reproduce. They're really an interesting species. They indicate high quality water. They have a low reproduction rate. The females often, bond with their male partners and on the coast, and they bring them back to the tributaries along the Bow River in the summer. So there are species at risk, and we do a lot of monitoring of our species at risk. So one of the things I shared in the Facebook group is the article all about the harlequin duck. So I'm not going to rhyme off all of their qualities here, but they are a species at risk. They indicate high quality, fast moving water. They do eat a lot of the bugs and insects in the riverbed. They are amazing to watch. They are what I would call amazing whitewater paddlers because they do the ferries across the river. They paddle in the big whitewater and they hang out on the gravel bars, and they're just very cool and pretty birds to watch. So one of the things that we did back in 2006 was we got together and we found where there was just below Lake Louise on the Bow River, there was a group of the harlequin ducks, and with young that could not fly completely yet. And that was the time to actually try to band them. And we didn't know if we would be able to do it or not. For some reason, these slides are a little bit out of order, but what happened was there were 3 canoes from the Canoe Club, and they actually, corralled the young harlequin ducks to the net and the net caught them. The banders know what they're doing in terms of no more harm done to the ducks. But once on shore, they were able to band the 3 ducks that we actually were able to capture. We actually had to participate in the, weighing the species, seeing what condition they were in, and keeping them quiet and calm before we actually released them once they were banded. So, I mean, it was a full day of harlequin duck, learning about the species and then helping hands-on. Yeah, and one of the distinctive ways to, identify them is from the side. Their big circle on their cheek is really distinctive, and the males are really colorful. Yeah, weighing them, checking out their feet and toes. And then we had to gather up and release them all together so that they could find their, parents again, which, the parents weren't too far away. And just as you're going under through the rapids at Lake Louise under the highway, there's that, route that you can take. It's where you would put in if you didn't want to do the rapids. And that's where we were doing all of this work. Yeah, there they go. So they're being released, they're healthy, they're probably not super happy, a bit stressed, but they now have their bird banding done and they're going to be good for a while. I'm going to stop sharing so that we can just see each other, and I didn't get to see you the whole time, but what I wanted to do was, oh, that's what happened. Sorry, there was one other thing and I wanted to show it. I don't know if I can still do that. Yeah, let me do that. Because come July, there's an anniversary coming up for our canoe club. And I wanted to present the canoe club with a special certificate of appreciation. There we go. I apologize. So this is a certificate of appreciation to the Bowwaters Canoe Club in recognition of the dedication with which you have all carried out your volunteer activities, including counting harlequin ducks, which is an indicator species and species at risk on the Bow River for the past 15 years. Parks Canada, all Canadians welcome and value the time, expertise, and effort you have so generously volunteered in support of the protection, commemoration, and appreciation of our national cultural and natural heritage. What I do want to say about this is I started out introducing the Canoe Club to the duck counting in 2006 with the bird banding, but really the Bowwaters Canoe Club members took it on as their own, and it has run itself quite well ever since. I mean, last year probably was an exception with not many trips, but almost every year we have had, Canoe Club out there counting ducks, and I've reported them. I've been part of those trips, but I've been very fortunate to have other people that have coordinated the trips and really made it happen. And in particular, I want to thank Pat Mahaffey for being a leader and coordinator of those trips so much. There's some years that it's not as on my radar. So with you being at the helm and taking the initiative, this really has, been something that we can proudly say the Canoe Club has done for 15 years. And hopefully we do it for another 15. So on behalf of Parks Canada, I wanted to say thank you to the club and to Pat for being part of this really important citizen science project. And then from there, I just want to welcome people to, try to be inspired to look at, well, what other species do we want to observe and record and report? And there's various ways to do that, and easier ways now, like with iNaturalist. So if you're a photographer, not even that good, but if you want to get better and you want to learn your flora and your fauna while you're on trips, the iNaturalist app is a great way to do that. Yeah, with that, it all contributes to conservation. And I thank you for your time tonight. This was a bit experimental, but I hope that you enjoyed it and got a few gems and tidbits out of it. Oh, and can we finish up the bingo? So under the O, 3, I research ecosystems that I paddle in. Under the I, number 4, I have helped with harlequin duck counts. Under the N, number 4, I have minimized garbage on trips and divided reusables and recyclables. And under the O, number 4, I use a citizen science app like iNaturalist to report on sightings. And I think we got them all. So if you've got any kind of row of 5 or a diagonal 5 in a row, you could be one of the top 3 bingo winners. And there's not that much competition. So what do you got, Pat?
I've got the 4 row. How's that how you say it? The
5 in a row?
horizontal row. Yeah.
Okay, snap a picture and send it to me.
Okay.
And then what I'll do is I'll put the prize pack together for you. There's going to be 3. So is there anybody else with a 5 in a row? Evan, you look very serious trying to figure it out.
I think so. I think it's the number 1 row. I've definitely stopped it at a watercraft inspection station. I've never taken fossils.
Yep.
I've heard of aquatic invasive species.
Invasives. Yep.
I take good care of gear.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
I can't check that off myself.
I know what a riparian zone means.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Evan. Well, then there you've got that one, and Pat, you said you have the one in the middle.
The 4th row.
4th row. Okay. Anybody else?
I got the G column.
G column. Whoa! Nice job, Les.
Mhm.
I mean, we could do more prize packs if somebody else has another 5er. One other thing I wanted to mention, Pat, is on behalf of the board and the whole club, really, thank you for doing such a bang up job on our communications. Yeah, like Laura wanted to me to stress that, and I didn't forget, but
Okay.
yeah, we really appreciate it.
Sometimes it's fun, yeah.
Yeah, everybody's giving you the, yeah. Okay, well, and I would love any kind of feedback or questions that you might have now. So the interesting thing is, for me, the takeaway is I tried to cover too much, but I always want to give a lot. So I'm trying to do this presentation again for Jim Oliver of Canoeing Live on May 16th. So I'd love feedback. And I just think the bingo is such a fun idea, but I don't know if it is. Maybe you can let me know.
I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
Maybe I structure it a bit more and make sure people get it ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would help probably. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
I got a question for you about campfires. Like,
yeah.
one of the times, from what I've read in other resources as well, it says to whatever wood that you can't burn down or haven't burned down due to the length of the time that you're up and you're going to bed late, they say to throw all that wood into the river to drift it down as your no trace. And I think in some places they say bury it. What do you feel about that?
Bury it.
I don't know. I always stayed up really late on the wind playing my drum so that I made sure the fire would burn right down. But I mean, yeah, can't always do that. A good question. I don't know, Evan, what do you think? You kind of have like the real kind of idea of fires and stuff on our longer trips. You seem like you, I don't know. I would say definitely the main thing is make sure the fire's out. And then, you know, if half a piece of wood is still like not burned right down to ashes, yeah, you want to basically not make it look like, oh, somebody can just have another fire here.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of throwing it in the river myself because to me it's unsightly. I'd rather hide the branches. You can easily stick them in the bush separately, scatter them around so that they're not
Yeah,
obvious. Because
and that's what,
they're nothing wrong with them. They're not pollution at all, or they're gonna rot away eventually.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Pat.
Yeah.
Definitely
yeah.
Well, else
I think-
burn your ashes down to ashes, all your embers.
Yeah. And
I
I
think
want to
the
make a point. I want to make a point too about the firing issue, and you kind of alluded to it by in the established campsites
Mhm.
along the North Saskatchewan. Leave them alone, of course. But I think that there's been an argument made that even on canoe on rivers that there's not formal campsites, but there are well-established fire rings. It's best to leave them
Yeah.
and not destroy them because people are going
Right.
to build another one anyway. If it's well established, and
Yeah,
maybe if there's two side by side, destroy one, say, or something like that. But I think there's an argument there.
I agree. I agree.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. You didn't have to agree with me. You could say, "Shut up, Mahaffey, dumbass."
Let's go paddling and we'll duke it out.
Yeah. All right. Ouch.
Oh no, not your finger.
That's my finger. See, it's all swollen. I like doing that. See, this one.
Oh yeah, of course.
I dislocated my finger. Can you imagine? God,
That does not sound fun.
I almost threw up. Yeah.
I bet. I slammed my finger in my car door one time a long time ago, and I almost fainted from the pain. So
Oh yeah.
I don't
Well,
have.
in this case, it didn't hurt much, but the whole finger was bent sideways 90 degrees. Oh God, I just about barfed, I'll tell you. But I grabbed it and I straightened it. Crunch.
Oh,
Right away. It sounded like celery breaking.
oh.
Oh my God, I miss you guys.
And you cried
Well,
Mhm. Anyway. Mhm.
yeah, this has been fun. Thank you for being my guinea pigs. And I next steps, I will work with Laura to put these packages together, but please send me like a mailing address that I can send stuff to, and then I'll mail it out to you. Sound good? So all those things plus like a water bottle, notepad, and of course you need that for canoeing. So
Wonderful, yeah. Is
well,
there a six-pack in that too, Tina?
a which?
A six-pack.
Somebody asked me that when we had another celebration of the Harlequin duck counts like years ago. Is there going to be beer? I'm like, oh, I don't think my MasterCard will allow me to buy beer. For the club.
Too bad. Too bad.
Mhm.
Yeah. Beer is always
Thank you
good.
very much, Tina, if you're done, thank you very much. on behalf of
Yes,
the
my
guys.
pleasure. My pleasure. Actually, I was so nervous. I dreamt about it several nights in a row, calling out bingos and just being like, chaotic.
Just relax. You're amongst friends, This is-
Right? I know. I was just so funny that I
Yeah.
had those dreams, but I was excited and a bit nervous. But yeah, thanks for being my trial, and
Cute.
I hope we
really
see each other
appreciate
on
it.
the river the rivers this summer. Let's get
Yeah.
that going after this like little month that we have to endure.
Yeah, let's hope we can keep it going. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, great.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Alrighty, thanks, Tina.
Good night.
Okay, take care.